a house is the security to take out a short contract in the New Zealand dollar, which long term is a good thing. The problem with it is it's attached to, state taxes like council rates and, water, and all of those are going to inflate beyond our wildest dreams over the next 30 to 50 years anyway. I don't even know if it'll be that long.
Hello, I am Cody Ellingham, and this is the Transformation of Value podcast. In this episode, I speak with Mikey Smith, a Kiwi Bitcoiner working in the world of mortgages and finance. Mikey gives some perspectives on the New Zealand housing situation, the slow train wreck that is the government, and what the longer-term outlook might be for the country. We also dive into personal responsibility, fishing off of Norfolk Island, and creating value. Now, next month, I will be heading over to BTC Prague, Europe's largest Bitcoin event. If you are thinking of going, please use the discount code TTOV to get 10% off your tickets. I hope to see you there. If you would like to support the show and my work, please consider tipping some sats to the show's wallet. Otherwise, pass this episode on to a friend who you think may enjoy it. If you have any questions or feedback, please reach out. My emails are always open, hello@thetransformationofvalue.com. Otherwise, on to the show. How you been though, mate?
Good, man. There's some pretty grim stories about the economy and stuff, so...
Well, as you know, I'm overseas and I'm sort of more and more looking back and I'm thinking, what is actually going on to my beloved New Zealand? It seems like it's just going downhill, man.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. I mean, I'm not smart enough to understand how government can get out of the mess that was created without even in my mind. I just don't really trust the state to solve anything. I'm such a free market believer that I don't understand. Even if it went back to that, I look around and I'm like, oh, it's still 10 years away from being fixed if it went back to free markets and stuff.
Well, it's a social cultural construct as well. I mean, New Zealand has a long history of the nanny state, and it's pretty hard to unwind and walk that back. And even so, you do that, you end up just with a bit of crony capitalism in there because you're always going to have favoured parties. You're going to have favoured contractors. New Zealand's too small to have a real genesis, I think, that's fair. You're going to have, it's just too small, right? So... I don't know, it's a rock and a hard place, perhaps.
It's interesting, because before I sort of became, in the stages, I think, of my own learning and learning to become a critical thinker myself, I used to think oh man, the game is to become Fulton Hogan, because then you are the monopoly and the state's only road and contractor. And that's kind of that's true, right? And for the system that's in place.
Mm.
And because if you can get to that status, you've basically got a lifetime of work. You get paid off the printing press, and you've got someone on the other side paying you who doesn't check the price, because they never went on a journey to earn it, so they don't know the pain of earning dollars, and they just go spend them because they come straight off the printing press. And it's and then you get so big, it's impossible to compete with. How can you compete with the government's contractor that fixes the roads that are completely butchered all the time?
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, look, we're talking about infrastructure here, and I guess kind of zooming out a little bit, the reason I wanted to reach out to you, I watched an episode you did with Leaky Homes and Darcy Ongaro on the Keep the Change podcast. Yep. You talked about, you touched on Bitcoin actually, which was quite interesting. You talked about the new issues with the New Zealand housing market, infrastructure, etc. And it seems like, I mean, these are common topics that people who are looking at markets, looking at macro, and kind of through a Bitcoin lens, we sort of gravitate towards, and we see it. They stand out like a sore thumb. What's your background? How did you come to be thinking like this? You talked about your critical thinking journey. Tell me a little bit about that, Mikey.
Yeah, so I guess fortunately my dad was a mechanic and self-employed at the same time. So I guess I just learned from him to think about how to fix things, and always question why and diagnosing something right. So I was sort of brought up that way and taught to diagnose correctly. And by diagnosing, you have to figure out the finer details of something and, you know, go to the next part and why is that and why is that and why is that. And then you finally end up at the answer and then reverse engineer it backwards and get to work. And that got taught, I got to work in his business with him. And before I understood anything to do with the constructs of the monetary system, I was just in the right hard work camp. I'm smart enough to work this out. I can work as much time as I want. I will get into property because that just seems to go up without understanding why. And then I was into, I guess, collectible cars in a way, and they were going up as well. And then I started to learn a little bit more about it, probably in my mid to late 20s. And then I was into gold. And I had already dabbled with Bitcoin at that stage and lost it. And it was an email scam and all this kind of stuff like years ago. And then I became a mortgage broker, which is one of the jobs where you sit like in between the printing press and the security, the collateral that they use to just send it out, just keystroke out units into the economy, right? And I don't know, it just sort of like had an awakening on me, and I was learning more about economics to try and understand it. And I understood very clearly how supply and demand works. And, you know, before COVID, actually, I started learning more about Bitcoin probably 2018, 2019. And I remember watching in like 2019, like the repo market in the US freeze up. And I was like, oh, something's going to happen here. And then, like, whatever you want to think about that whole timeline, then COVID happened and we got the unlimited printer. Funny that. Then by the time 2020 came around, I was balls deep in the Bitcoin mindset. I was like, oh, this is the only solution long term. Because the March, April 2020, when the printers got turned on massive, was confirming to me that that's what they're going to do every time. Like 2008 wasn't an accident. Like that was putting it on show. And then we just got front row seats to the encore in 2020, you know. And I just think even now, the way that the system works, where we vote leaders out, even if they want to do the right thing, the short-term mindset of the population will always vote out someone who's not going to turn it on. You know, even now I'm thinking about the New Zealand government and I'm like, they're firing people and cutting costs and all that. I'm like, in the back of my mind, I'm like, man, they're going to have to be careful because they won't get back in next time. So that they're not allowed to have long-term thinking.
Yeah, the system
So,
precludes it. Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah,
So, and then every now and then I think to myself, the person in control could, you know, the Reserve Bank or the central banks anywhere in the world could make money harder by making moves, as in, you know, making interest rates higher and not buying bonds and not doing QE, but they can't because they'll get voted out and hated and, you know, like it's just how the system is designed to work and it will work like that forever until one day our houses will be $10 million and your salaries will be $1 million for minimum wage.
yeah. It's interesting. I mean, the housing story in particular, with regards to New Zealand, is really quite difficult. You're either in it or you're not. And I know
Yep.
certainly a lot of younger people, it's just not even an option. Probably one of the easiest options up until maybe this most recent government change was to actually work for the government. That was probably the easiest way to get the cash flow to be able to afford a house.
Yeah, well,
That's, yeah,
public sector job, you're going to get a 30% increase on what you're currently doing, and it's job security and all the rest of it. So,
yeah, that's right. That's changed obviously with the recent changes, but still, it's really quite problematic. And you know, not being able to plan for the future, not being able to have a place to call home, you know, having fucking flatmates, you know, and trying to have a family and stuff, they're just incompatible. And kind of anti-human in a way. Like, what is that? Is that the New Zealand dream?
it's wild, man. And, you know, it's been so beneficial for the last 50 years for a group and that group's big enough to have voting power. So again, it just feeds back into like the doom loop, eh? So, you know, like if I wave my wand and I say, right, New Zealand, next election I'm going to run and we're going to send interest rates to zero, blah, blah, blah. We're going to do this, we're going to do that. People would vote for it. They're going to vote for a housing market to go up again because parents will just say, oh, we'll be able to use ours to get you yours. And like, there's enough of a voter base there to control it. It's interesting, man. Like I'm so it's
Well, you're working within the machinery of this whole system with the mortgage
my job
business.
relies on it. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, how do you feel
Yeah.
about that, just personally, if I may ask? Like,
Yeah, so I went through probably a period personally of being like, man, once I figured all this out, um, I was like, oh, this is not really a moral thing to do. The worst part is the way for me when I look at it, like looking down on the insides of my job and how it's regulated to talk to people and financial advice and stuff. Like I can't talk about Bitcoin
really?
to someone individually. Yeah, I'm
I
not
see.
allowed to really. So I have to talk about housing and, getting debt, and I can basically talk to people and explain if they want to learn about the mechanics of the monetary system in New Zealand, I can talk to them about that and then explain to them how a house is the security to take out a short contract in the New Zealand dollar, which long term is a good thing. The problem with it is it's attached to, state taxes like council rates and, water, and all of those are going to inflate beyond our wildest dreams over the next 30 to 50 years anyway. I don't even know if it'll be that long. But I sort of keep peace with myself. Like I'm not capable of stopping people wanting a house.
Well, it's a cultural tsunami that is, in a funny way, it's one of these things that maybe gets more attractive as it becomes more untenable. It's sort of like,
Yeah.
well, what else are you going to do? Especially if you don't know about bitcoins.
Yeah, yeah. One of my sayings is like Bitcoiners buy Bitcoin because they understand the money, and property people buy property because they don't understand, because they're buying it based on, all of this marketing that's been done, 10-year property cycles. It always doubles every 10 years. There's property clocks online that you can like they take you through and all of this stuff. And then no one shares the increase in the monetary base of New Zealand and puts that against a graph and sees perfect correlation. Like the units are getting keystroked in and the housing market goes up. It's pretty hilarious. And they don't know. And, you know, part of me is like, you shouldn't need to know. If we had a fixed inflation rate, imagine where you could get that. And you didn't have to worry about monetary policy and the movements and keeping things afloat and bailouts and things like that to keep the whole system going. And you could literally just save what you earned and then go buy a house when you saved up for it.
Hmm.
To me, that would be more fair.
Yeah.
But that's not how it is at the moment. And property people jump in because they're like, if I don't get in now in 10 years, it's going to double. They don't understand the underlying mechanics behind it, which, it's arguable. I don't think they should have to, but it's helpful if you do understand that.
Well, I guess what we've talked about so far. It feels like it is sort of the symptoms and the problems that we're seeing. And I mean, it goes much further than housing, as you know. The roads are the classic one. Basically, having spent some time overseas now for the last 6 months, I can really say New Zealand is not a developed country. Our main highways are 50k in some areas. Just the basic mechanics of a functioning economy are not there. All the bits that are there are decaying, and that's not hyperbole. Like, it really, potholes on State Highway 1 and 50k zones, that's unacceptable for a developed nation, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
In Northland, I was up there at Christmas and I came back and I posted. I was like, man, I feel sorry. I thought the roads in Auckland were horrendous. Northland is dangerous.
oh, yeah?
Like, and then I had some other guys reaching out to me that like ride motorbikes, and they're like, yeah, we can't ride at night now because we'll crash.
Yeah.
And like, okay, all very well, but like, what was the point of like forever increasing taxes then?
Yeah.
Because all they've done is gone up for 30 years and not kept up and not indexed to inflation. So like, what's happened? Like, I've heard
Yeah.
stories from older people saying that New Zealand's healthcare, which was a public system like 40 years ago, still a public system, was the best in the world. And it's just slowly deteriorated. We see it across everything: infrastructure, health, hospitals,
Well,
education.
a little bit more on that. So just, I still, it's funny the cultural impact that this has on me personally. Like, you talk about hospitals, man. Like, I don't go to hospitals, and now that I actually can, because I can walk down the street and be seen within half an hour here in Japan where I am, and pretty much anywhere else that I've travelled to recently, compared to the 9 hour wait in the Wellington
Yeah,
DHB. I mean, that's left an imprint on me that is just kind of quite sad, really. that's the state of New Zealand. And unless you're dying or you've got bones sticking out of your skin, you pretty much
Yeah.
just get an aspirin and a Panadol and,
Yeah, yeah.
and kind of just
Yeah, we have to
man
be
through it.
wealthy and buy private care, right?
Well, that doesn't even work though. I mean, what are you going to do? Like the hospitals are all connected. You don't really get preferential
Yeah,
treatment
yeah.
as far as I know.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
all-
yeah. There's some advantages in private care, but if it's accident and emergency, like if it's an emergency, you
that's
get
right.
bumped off to the public anyway system.
Yeah, yeah. So for
So
elective surgery, yes, but look, man, I guess I'm wanting to zoom out here though because we're describing symptoms. We're describing, basically everything that's wrong, which I believe every Kiwi is pretty much aware of. Maybe they're not aware of how bad it is relative to other places, but it's still certainly really bad. But I think trying to move towards a more positive tone. I mean, let's talk about solutions here. Obviously, Bitcoin is something you and I share an interest in.
yeah,
The move from housing to Bitcoin as a focal point for people, though, I mean, that's a pretty big ask, I think, culturally.
yeah.
Let's talk about that, though. I mean, how do we see this unfolding over the next, say, decade?
Oh man, I'm of two minds there, eh? The optimistic side of me is that people will. So part of me is like people jump into housing and they don't know why. And that could happen to Bitcoin too, right? Like people can just jump in because of number go up. Very hard to stay because of volatility. And I mean, it's arguable whether that'll continue. I think it will, but you know, that's why people stay in houses longer term because they're not volatile and they're not liquid actually, so they can't be volatile because it takes 6 months to sell a house. But regardless of that, like the optimism side of me definitely looks at it and goes, maybe they will just come in for number go up, and that's enough to save some people. Because, like, personally, to go back, I think there's a certainty that the New Zealand dollar dies one day. I don't. There's zero doubt in my mind. It's the thing that 2020 confirmed for me. They're gonna get rid of this thing into oblivion. But maybe they come in and it saves some people, and we'll see how the government treats it over time, and hopefully there's enough nation state game theory occurring where people won't get treated badly if they want to go down that road because they're public servants and they work for us, so they should allow us to do and choose how we want, but we'll see. And then the bad side of me, the sad part is maybe people don't catch on. We continue on this path of, I guess, wealth division due to the housing market and assets, and Bitcoiners maybe continue to get treated poorly and taxed for, taking it back to go and start a business or something, and they just fly off with, 12 or 24 words in their head and go somewhere else where they get treated better. And, it's so tiny at the moment in New Zealand. I know there's some good stuff happening. That there's not really enough of a footprint for anyone to care at this stage if they do leave. But I think they're generally speaking pretty clever people that have good morals. Like when you go down that journey, it almost makes you a better person learning about it. And I'd be sad if those people left, like you, you're gone.
Yeah,
But it's also completely understandable because there's only so much a human can take before they need to get treated better, right? Especially when there's obviously greener pastures.
yeah, and I think that's probably what for people who haven't travelled, and it's pretty common in New Zealand, I would say. Maybe people have been to Australia, but even then, having actually seen much of the rest of the world, New Zealanders I think have an idea or an imagination of what they think the world is like, and then there's the reality. And as I said, I really think New Zealand sits very low in the developed nation index, and you could probably find the stats, and they're probably fudging the numbers, but just the vibe of just your basic day-to-day necessities and healthcare and all of that stuff we talked about, it isn't really up to spec, man. And I think even the Australia comparison's pretty out of whack. I think most Kiwis would be shocked at just how developed somewhere like Sydney is, which has its own problems, don't get me wrong, and its housing problems probably bigger than New Zealand, but in terms of just infrastructure,
Yeah, you just go for a drive in Sydney, you're like, wow, my car doesn't rattle the dash out.
yeah.
Like it's
Well,
just basics.
yeah, and I mean, there's again various kind of reasons for that, and I think the genesis, kind of the origin story of New Zealand and Australia, maybe started off in similar places, but there were policy decisions and things, decisions were made, and the countries sort of took their separate paths, and I wonder, is there a more quaint future for New Zealand where it really just sort of recedes into a place of sort of a middle tier? I don't know how you would even classify countries these days, but sort of,
Yeah, I mean,
it's, yeah,
it is. It's hard. It's hard to sort of put it into a bracket, but I know what you mean. I think, I mean, it's years away from being corrected, and like again, the optimistic side of me is like I'm personally never gonna go into government. Like I have no desire to. The system has you have to conflict yourself too much, and you have to contradict yourself, and go back on a few things that are your morals to get anything done and all that kind of thing. But the optimistic part of me is like someone maybe from the community that understands the monetary effects that central banking has had over time will get in there and slowly transition it. And if you think about it, like I'm 33 now, and if I was going to go down that road, by the time I was 43, I'd be making a decision to go and move into politics. So there's someone out there that has an understanding of it and is going to be coming into that scene in the next 10 years, whether it'll be marketed well and told about it, or whether it's kept behind the scenes and some legislation's put in place or removed or whatever to try and start that transition. Who knows? But, you know, I'm hopeful for that. But without that, it's just going to be like 70% tax rates and socialism, man.
yeah. Well, along those lines, I think the political angle is something that's often talked about, and especially in the kind of normie, non-Bitcoin world, it's sort of seen as the only pathway for change. However, you'll be familiar with maybe the sovereign individual and these kinds of
Yeah,
concepts,
Darcy
right?
told me about that. I haven't read it, but
I highly
yeah,
recommend it. It's a bit of a mission. It's a bit of a brick of a book, but the
yeah,
audio book's quite good. But effectively, what it talks about is kind of a post-democratic, almost post-political world where the role of government is a lot more diminished, not by voluntarily giving it up, which they never will, but effectively, for example, there's housing in Hawke's Bay that I've seen with my own eyes that is not compliant. It is illegal housing that has been built, and this was before the floods, so I believe it got damaged. But this was where some of the orchard workers were living. These were
mm,
shacks. These were slums that were built in
yeah,
Hawke's Bay. And I believe what we'll see is as things get more and more difficult with regulation, people will find a way. And this is where, say, the incentives come through. And so I see a future where, you've got up until now, maybe very law-abiding New Zealand. I think, generally speaking, people are pretty onto paying their GST. They want to be, good citizens, kind of follow the law. And we saw that with COVID, a certain naivety. I wonder if, say, 10 years from now, there's maybe a lot more kind of grey zone. There's a lot more,
mm,
who do you know kind of thing going on. If you want to get a house built, you want to get some projects like green stickered, you kind of have to go and, pay a certain person.
yeah. Well, it's going to be interesting, right? Like by then we'll have our CBDC. So, if people aren't switched on enough, then they won't be able to do that. Well, if they're switched on enough, they'll see that coming and, you know, figure out the other way to get around that.
What are your thoughts on the whole CBDC narrative in New Zealand?
Um,
Like,
I'm
how is it even in the news and stuff? Like, is it something that normal
no,
people are aware of?
no, I don't think so. But I have lots of hopeful conversations behind the scenes with lots of, self-employed people and or tradesmen and just like good Kiwis that want to go to work, do a good job, get paid, and go home to their family or whatever. There is an underlying unspoken, as in it's not out in the media and not really talked about. There's a narrative building and there's a distrust for a distrust building for the state, and CBDC is known about, and they're not on board with it. So I reckon it'll be hard for them to get it past the goalie.
Well, I think along those lines, what we just talked about, there is an undercurrent of goody two shoes in New Zealand, which is, every GST claim, it's all done by the book. However, I wonder if we actually see a bit of a move back to the good old days, I guess you could say, of the tradie taking cash and the kind of the old school ways of doing
Mm.
things. Because I remember GST is relatively new. It was what, 1987 or something,
Yeah,
right?
something like that.
And it was only 10% as well. When it might have been less than that, but whenever it first came out before my time,
Funny how it always goes up, eh?
it never goes away, and it's perhaps the
No.
most pernicious kind of tax because it affects people who've got no fucking money more than anyone else. So it's sort of like,
Yeah.
well, what are you going to do? And it's never going to go away. So if anything, it's going to go up to 20. So
Yeah, yeah. Problem is jail, man.
yeah,
Like, like how do you get around that?
yeah. Well,
You
that's the
know, my
thing. But
my plumber said to me like a couple of weeks ago, he said he was talking about because end of financial year here in New Zealand, he's talked to his accountant. I said, "How'd your year go, mate?" He goes, "You're really good, but the tax is fucking astronomical, eh?" And he's a good business operator, he's got a few guys, and he's probably over into that income tax bracket of over 180, so he's getting done 39% plus all his GST and everything. And he said, you know, they have to put you in jail if you don't pay this because the value you get out of paying it isn't there. And I was just like, oh, he has no idea about the system, the money, but he's starting to be like, I'm not getting value for this 50% business partner that doesn't do anything for me. If anything, the roads are getting worse, the rubbish gets missed, what are council rates for?
well, it'll be
Like
more than
all of
it'll
the
be
stuff.
it'll be more than 39% when you pull in rates. It'll be
Everything, like
close to
everything you touch.
half. Yeah,
Yeah. So like he's like, I've got a 50% business partner that never shows up,
yeah.
and if people are starting to think like that, that's to me, I mean, it's sad, but that it's got to there, of course, but it's positive that there's this thought process. I said to him, I was like, man, you're like 3 years away from becoming a hardcore Bitcoiner. And he was like, oh, fucking, he doesn't understand that at all, but he'll be back to learn about it.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it's what we would call a bludger, that business partner that doesn't fucking do anything, right?
Yeah.
Also known as
Yeah.
the government. But coming back to the CBDC piece, because I follow this very closely, and it feels a bit gross because, I mean, deep down, I kind of like New Zealand people, spending time overseas. You're like, yeah, there's a lot of cultures and countries out there where maybe the people aren't so friendly or whatever, but generally speaking, Kiwis are good people. And then you find out the kinds of people who are working on this stuff down in Wellington, and you think, man, these are actually scumbags, and these are actually bad people, and they've got this sort of puppeteering going on where they're talking to certain outlets, and they're very selective about how they broach the topic. They're not very transparent at all, and for something so important, I would expect a little bit more scrutiny. I don't know. It's like
Yeah,
they're doing it deliberately, kind of keeping it under the covers.
it is. I mean, it doesn't surprise me, right? Like, of course they want to introduce it and keep it under wraps and you know, it's, I feel like they're just going to say something like, here, you can open this wallet on your phone and you can access $500, which is a week's worth of bills, blah, 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 and then you're in, and then you can start getting paid here. Here's your new bank account that you can be transferred to and you guys can trade between each other and that's it. It's implemented, right? And they didn't really need to work hard to do it. But man, you have to think about the second and third order effects of that. And I do think, of course, they know that. That's why they want it. So why would they tell anyone about that? I mean, I went onto the Reserve Bank of New Zealand's website to do, I don't know, they were asking for people's opinions, and I did I went through a written one, and then I went through basically a multi-choice one. And they don't really give you any multi-choice to say you don't want it. The questions were worded in such a way where you have to answer with the weirdest answers. They don't really. So most people are going to go on there and take that one, and then you don't really have a chance to be like, no, this is not ideal for the future sovereignty of each individual in the country. Like, we don't want this.
Well, they use a certain kind of language, which I pick up on, I guess, just as a communicator. I'm like, man, clearly they are programming people to think about this, and they use the words and they're kind of like this, what we call it, the jargon, to make it seem, they talk about open banking and innovation and private money and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah,
But it's all kind of basically bullshit. Like, they have to kind
yeah,
of dance around it. And the videos and the media and the comms that come out of the RBNZ are very,
almost pro.
eh?
They're just pro CBDC.
Well, but I mean, it's propaganda basically, but
Yeah,
it's also dumbed down to a degree where there's no real engagement, and I haven't seen the mainstream media talk about this whatsoever, and so there's no way for the average Kiwi to actually understand what's happening. It's like, I
yeah,
mean, it's up to people like you and myself to actually kind of have the conversation, but it's like we're just a couple of people, and there's other Bitcoiners who are, and others maybe who are not Bitcoiners, but are aware of what's going on, but we're a very small minority.
yeah. And it's kind of like, I mean, zooming right up from that. It's like I can talk to people about it and give my opinion on why I think it will end up with tyrannical control on your movement and your purchasing. Like if you want to go and put petrol in your car one day, you won't be able to because, the money will say that you can't put petrol in, you've got to go and charge your EV or whatever. And I can say how that's bad, but I can't, like, the person in control of that is we didn't vote in. We can't vote them out, you know, and that only ends in a couple of ways. Everyone obeys and does what they're told, or it's like revolution eventually, civil unrest. So they'd have to be careful.
Do you think Kiwis have that in them?
Um, that's an interesting question. We definitely prefer not to have confrontation. I reckon that's part of like long term, that culture of not being interested in confrontation and stuff like that is basically thanks to our geographical location. Like we don't have to be. It's a very nice idea that there's a whole lot of wars kicking off at the moment and we don't have the power to be involved or anyone targets us because we're so far away and don't really matter and we're poor and and I think that gets sort of spread through society, right? Like I don't like fighting.
Yeah. Well, I just wonder. I mean, I come back to COVID and just the mass compliance of that
Yeah,
tyrannical regime.
I got in trouble in COVID.
Yeah, me too. um, but how did that? I mean, there was a small, dedicated band of people, and arguably that it was a successful counter-revolution there because you know, we changed
We,
it. And
well, COVID was a beautiful example. Like, imagine if they just said stay at home, and you can run that for a certain amount of time purely based on fear. But then after 5 days, you got to pay the people because otherwise they're going to go and figure out ways to keep their lives going, right? Like you can't, like no one's going to stay at home. And it's a beautiful example that we can be bought for $484 a week, the whole nation, and then we start knocking on our neighbors and, they got everyone basically the most divisive year in history, like as long as I've ever been alive for sure. And just wild, like evidence slapping us in the face that we can be bought for $500 a week
yeah,
with no care for the consequence of what printing $500 a week does.
well, yeah. I mean, I sort of I've put those memories into a special box that I try not to go back to because it was so challenging for me.
Oh
Um,
man,
you know,
I got kicked out of my office. I got caught by the police for being around at a mate's house talking over the fence, so not even on his property. Like just the wildest shit. Looking back now, I'm just like, man, I was getting in trouble for like running my mouth a bit at the time, a little bit. I kept pretty quiet because I didn't, there was definitely a narrative there that if you disagreed with this, we'll shut your shit down.
mm,
But man, looking back now, I laugh at yeah, just the people that were loud about it. Like, I mean, that guy Andrew Tate like basically built a brand off it, right? And like, good for him. Like, he was like, "Fuck this! If this thing kills us." I mean, like, you don't have to agree with what Andrew Tate does or how he acts or whatever, but like, man, he put his money where his mouth is and just kept going and didn't comply and legend.
yeah. No, it was tough times, but I think for me there was the obviously the protest at the convoy, which I was there for that 23 days in Wellington, and I look back at it and think, man, that was the most Kiwi thing I've ever seen. I don't know if you were part of that at all, but it was.
Yeah, I wasn't there, but I know some very close friends were
Yeah,
there.
that it was, and it was funny because it was like, man, that was far now. That was fucking family friendly. It was just the most legitimate.
Portrayed in the media as war.
Yeah, yeah, but it was totally
Yeah.
it was totally destroyed in the media, and I just remember that and think, man, I can never trust the mainstream media, and I was already off it at the time,
Yeah.
but and I think, man, that was like the last bastion of New Zealand, and interestingly, it was a very working class. I mean, it was kind of all levels actually. I met like a former police officer. I met like families from like Gisborne, like it was all sorts of people, but
Mm.
mostly it was like a real working class type vibe. And it sort of aligns with what you were saying around tradies and the kind of the classic image of the Kiwi small business owner, who's just kind of had enough. Because we don't have enough of a elite class in New Zealand. I don't think we really have much of it at all, unlike other countries. There is a political class, but it's so small.
Mm.
And there is a landed gentry class of the classic boomer landlord. But even
Yeah.
then, a lot of those people were also part of the pushback. So
Yeah, I mean, imagine all that thing turned up to 11 with the CBDC, right? So even if you do try and, like, if you're like me and you try and sneak out to go around to, I don't know, find some legend who was selling coffee secretly in a lockdown, like, they can track your money now. So,
yeah,
like, I can't even pay cash and keep that on the down low.
yeah,
So,
yeah,
it's a wild thing to think about, and the consequences are so dire that, and you can't say that they won't use it in like a tyrannical fashion, because the last few years showed that they will use those powers. Like, there's evidence now.
yeah, yeah. Well,
So
they've done it. They've done it before, and people have short memories. They're sort of like
that's
goldfish in a way.
this that's like that I've got this optimism side of my head and the darker side of my head, and the short memory part is definitely in the darker side of my head.
Yeah, man. Well, look, it's challenging. I mean, as I said, I'm not sure anymore, man. I look back at New Zealand and it feels stagnant. It feels like it's not necessarily going to be this kind of just collapse, but it's sort of just a slow, what Cory Doctorow would call enshittification. Things just get worse and worse.
That's a good word.
And you don't see the returns, you don't see the success. It's like, man, Wellington. I'm just waiting for that thing to go. We just need one more earthquake and Wellington's done.
Yeah,
There's
Wellington
not
is.
like there's not
Uh,
even any shops or anything anymore, man. It's just such a
nah.
shithole.
Well,
I
like,
mean,
my main office is in Takapuna on the North Shore of Auckland, and I'm in my little bubble. I drive to work, I park, I walk literally out of my car park into my office and see everyone, and we're all doing our thing. But the other day I went for a meeting down the road, and like every second building has a for lease sign on it. And the only ones that are open are cafes. Like, how much coffee can, like, run an economy?
yeah,
And actually, I've got an interesting story about this. So I was over in Bitcoiners were able to piece this together. So I was over in Brisbane about a year ago, and it was for a holiday with my partner and my mum and dad, actually, and we went to a place, two and a half hours. It felt like going into the outback, out of Brisbane, and it was to pick up some car parts for a rare car. And we turn up there, and this guy's got this factory, and it's massive, and it's just loaded with these, like, classic car parts. And we get talking to him. We end up there for a couple of hours yarning, real classic Aussie, just like real hard case guy. And he starts saying, "Oh, do you want to buy it? I'm done. I'm retiring. I've had enough. I've got commercial buildings everywhere. I don't need the money for this, fuck around with shipping and all this kind of stuff anymore." And I said, "Oh man, there's definitely an opportunity. There's people that want this stuff in New Zealand, but I don't know where I'd run it if I took it over. Like, what does this building cost?" And he's like, "Oh, probably 400 or 500 grand." And I said, "Yeah, in New Zealand, I'd be looking at this building like 5 or 6 million." And he goes, "Oh yeah, you've got the same problem that the guys in Sydney that tried to buy it off me from. It's a profitable business, but they needed a $7 million building to operate out of, and because of the area they're located in." So I went away from that talking to him, and I'm not going to move to the outback, out the back of Brisbane, to go and run this business. But I went away and I thought about it on the plane home, and I was writing notes sort of for the other podcast that I'm on, and I thought, because of the property 50-year bull run, whether it's commercial or residential, a small business that wants to get going can't now, because who's going to come up with $6 or $7 million to operate their shop? You can't even afford the lease. And you can have, like, the conversation with the older people, and they say, you just start out small and build it up. But it's the jump to beginning now is too far. Like, if you go and lease somewhere in Takapuna and it's $50,000 a year, that's a big hurdle rate to start selling coffee on. If you're making $1 a cup of coffee, holy shit. Like, I'd be puckering, like, when you start
yeah,
forecasting that out. And then anything else. And then you start to see it in shopping centres. So I go back to the Gold Coast, and I'm in the shopping centre, and I like model aeroplanes, like RC cars. I like toys and stuff like that. And I'm walking around with the missus and the family, and the only shops are like high-end fashion and makeup. And I thought about it, and I was like, the only reason these guys can afford to be inside this real estate, there's no toys around, there's no RC shops, there's no nothing, it's all gone. literally in a shopping mall, there's only like woman stuff. And the only reason they can do that is because their margins are 300% and they can afford to pay the leases on these buildings. So what happens over time with this basically depreciating currency and inflation is that you wash out anything that is actually cool and productive. Like if I get into more airplane, I learn about aerodynamics and radio control stuff and servos and batteries and parallel and like all of this stuff that is very helpful to a young guy, it would be. But instead, when he goes into the shopping center with mum, he's getting taught about Gucci and, all of the shit that you never need. It's never going to teach you anything. So it's actually like I was in this shopping mall thinking, fuck, we have fucked this up royally. And
Well,
it's actually no one's fault in there. They don't understand. It's just the money's fault.
yeah. Well, actually, just adding to that, Mikey, I just flew back from Hong Kong. I was over there for a few things, and I was in Hong Kong airport, and just in I mean, it's a huge place, in the airport, and there was like Chanel and then the Louis Vuitton shop. And I've never, I don't know about you, but that's just like, it's not a New Zealand thing, right, to get into that sort of stuff. I think maybe on Queen Street there's like a Louis Vuitton store, maybe, but
Yeah.
it's just not something I grew up with, that
No.
kind of designer fashion. And I always thought it was super tacky. And I walked in and you look at the stuff and it is so tacky. And then you look at the price and you think, man, who would pay for this $2,000,
Yeah.
$3,000 for a shitty
Yeah.
bag? And
Yeah.
then you
Yeah. Yeah.
realize it's because it's the money. You can't save your money. So people invest in these items, these collectibles. It's kind of got in a way, it's become a store of value because there is a secondary market.
Yep.
You buy them, you don't even take them out of the box. And there's a whole market for it, but just the tackiness of it, because I always assumed luxury brands would be something kind of beautiful and kind of profound, but yeah, they're actually pretty shit. And you go in and there's no taste. I don't know, just that was just an
I
observation.
mean, even if you like that stuff, like fair enough, go for it. But be honest with yourself about what it
Yeah.
costs. Like even if they market to you that it's this leather from Italy and we're only making, five of these, so they're adding in scarcity or whatever it is, which is all great, go for it. But at least admit that that $5,000 handbag literally only costs $15.
Yeah.
Just be honest.
Yeah.
Because, you know, I can go and find the materials as well and show you. And then once you put a robot together, which is effectively skilled labor at no cost, running 24/7 to sew it together, like it doesn't matter. You got done by marketing, but and good on the companies for pulling it off. Honestly, like I'm a capitalist. If you can pull that off, you go for it. But it's sad that it squashes out everything else that would be a more productive use of that space.
Well, actually, I guess the more pernicious piece is that kind of consumer spending and that sort of thing. It really crowds out what I think is really important, which is focus on engineering, infrastructure, these kinds of questions, And you talked about model aircraft, vehicles, mechanics, there's your background. And I think there's something really honorable about that. I don't know another way of describing it, but, just being able to build stuff and create things as opposed to just being a consumer. And I mean, that's maybe perhaps more of an Asian thing. Just Hong Kong airport is probably the most consumer place in the world,
Yeah.
but there's not really any value there in the sense of new new technology, new
Yeah.
ideas. That's just kind of consumption, and that has its role. But that, alongside housing, it's extremely unproductive. And we have a history of housing bubbles. You talk about a 50-year bull cycle, but on housing, but you've got the Asian financial crisis, which was pretty much driven by housing. I mean, Japan had one as well, a real estate bubble. I mean, these things that
Oh yeah.
they happen and then they pop. And
Yeah.
when they pop, you kind of have to go back to your principles and your fundamentals, which I think we started this conversation with talking about your interest in free markets and that sort of thing. So being a bit more positive here, I mean, what are some principles you think we can look at for New Zealand that maybe could help us get out of this situation?
Mm. It's interesting because a lot of the stuff I believe that, Kiwis used to have a reputation of like number eight wire mentality. If it's not going, I'll get it going. If it's broken, I'll fix it. And I was thinking about why that seems to have been washed away. And I actually think it's in part due to mass regulation, which is also what politicians do who don't understand monetary policy causing the housing market boom. Just regulate it to slow it down. More regulation, that'll fix it. And then it really doesn't because we just load more cash into it and people find a ways and loopholes to make sure they can protect what they go to work for. And it takes away, you know, personal responsibility. And I'm a massive proponent for personal responsibility. Like if I get caught speeding, I'm wrong and I pay my fine and that's the rule. But also going back to like what you were saying about traveling and stuff, I go to this place, I haven't been for a couple of years, but this place called Norfolk Island, which is off the top of New Zealand and it's actually
Mm.
Australian territory. But like we go fishing off the rocks there. There's no coast guard. No one knows you're there. If you fall in, you die. And like when you get there, because we're so bubble wrapped here in New Zealand, this nanny state thing, it takes a couple of days to adjust, which sounds crazy because you're just walking around some rocks and climbing down a bit of a cliff to go fishing on this rock. But in the back of your mind, when you 100% know there is no help, it's a different feeling. And by the end of the week of being there, I feel like completely liberated. And I come back to New Zealand saying, oh, fuck, this sign's stupid. Why does the door on the lift tell me that the door's opening? And you come back and it's like opposite.
Yeah.
Like, just leave me alone. I'll make my own decisions.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know how to reinstate that, eh? I am hopeful. The more conversations I'm having, not in like I don't listen to any media, but I know that's a shit show. But the more conversations I'm having, and mainly self-employed people are starting to be, there's something wrong here, and they're recognizing it and seeing that it's getting ridiculous. I mean, that's the beginning of it because the more that groundswell movement of talking about these things being wrong and not having personal responsibility and being able to make your own decisions as a moral, good human and it being accepted and the consequence being accepted when you're wrong as well, if that starts creeping in, through society, then that's what builds it, right? That's how nations were built and people grouped together and some people, you know, had to compromise on their views for the greater good of others and everything starts rolling and economies are built and some are better than others because better decisions are made and they build the right people and put the right people in charge and yeah, I hope we go back that way, but it does definitely seem dull at the moment and it's very hard to see the light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah.
Even this government that we've got now, the new one, I should be careful because I've got such a distaste for like the state that I don't have a side. But they campaigned on, Winston Peters campaigned on like freedom and sovereignty and all this, and that fixing red tape was the ACT guy, David Seymour's thing, and I don't know, Luxon's just like a corporate, playboy for the position, in my opinion, just to be the leader and take the heat. But not a peep out of the CBDC after all that chat about regulation, independent sovereignty, literally not one word. So they're full of shit,
Yes.
like up to their eyeballs full of shit.
Yes.
They campaign on tax cuts, income tax cuts, then they get in and say, oh, the books aren't as good, they're worse than they looked every fucking time. It's hilarious.
Short
I
memories,
just,
right? Yeah.
yeah, I just laugh at these people who like go in and vote and think there's going to be a change. They're just full of shit.
Yeah.
So who knows? I think it has to start from the bottom up, which is a beautiful thing about like Bitcoin, right? Because it kind of is bottom up rather than top down.
Yeah.
And if you have bottom up money, maybe that means bottom up system can prevail one day.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think looking at those principles, I think personal responsibility, I think the kind of the bones of New Zealand, and that's something that's probably worth mentioning as well, compared to Australia, I think, I don't know the exact numbers, but I have a feeling there's just a lot more what you would call sort of semi-rural or kind of just people who are closer to the land. I think if you look at Australia, you've got these mega cities in each of the states, and then these like small towns. But I think New Zealand, for the most part, outside of Auckland, it's all just small towns.
Mm.
Even somewhere like Christchurch, it's not really a city in the sense of like Sydney or Melbourne, and so there's just sort of a guts to the place and a kind of a reality check. And you talk to tradies, you talk to just working class people, and I think they kind of get it. And maybe they're just a bit too humble to kind of speak out about it or whatnot. It's sort of a Kiwi trait. But you're having these conversations. I know others are. And
Mm,
as I said before, I've seen shacks that have been assembled, for houses.
yeah.
And at a certain point, I wonder if it's just like, yeah, we've got an illegal dwelling. What are you going to do about it? And if enough people do it, because what else are you going to do? It costs millions of dollars to get a subdivision organised. Well, we'll just
Yeah.
build a house. Someone's qualified master builder. We'll just go and build it.
Yeah.
I
Yeah. Yeah.
wonder if you start seeing those kind of grinding down of the kind of blind respect for
Mate, I'd love to see it.
probably be better built than some of the shit that's gone through. Like, I mean, you remember the
Yeah.
Leaky Homes
So like
fiasco?
what I get to see in my job, right, is the I get someone who wants to buy one of these new build townhouses, and not all of them, this is just a bad example. So I've seen good ones too and good projects. But what happens is I get this person who signs a contract and they go and buy this townhouse and make an offer and it gets accepted, blah, blah, blah. And it's brand new. It's just past code of compliance, which is basically council sign off saying, yep, the builder met all of the rules. Everything here is as per our regulation, which we wanted it built, all the insulation and everything, double glazing, all this good shit. Sounds awesome. Client goes and gets a building report done from a building inspector. And the building report comes back and there's missing flashings and there's a hole in the roof, where wind can blow water in, and, you know, all sorts of stuff that's like quite a mega job to repair on this brand new home. And what's actually happened, that's all fine. Then they have a warranty and the builder has to go back in and the developer says to the builder, go and fix it and blah, blah, blah. But the council and the regulations over time have got so much. You need a PhD to understand them for a start. Like, a builder is not a doctor, but they have to be. And it's the same in every industry with like health and safety and understanding it all, right? But when they go through this and they build them to spec, it costs so much to subdivide, get council sign off, get resource consent, get code of compliance, and meet all the regulations along the way. Have someone come out and check on the project while you're doing it. Civil has to do their part of the regulation and all the stuff. It costs so much that you have to cut corners to make a profit because everyone else is. And you end up with this shithouse product that will be ghetto in 10 years.
Yeah,
And it's wild. Like, it's wild that that isn't seen by the system. And, that actually starts with currency debasement.
it's all connected
Like,
to the money, man.
it's all connected, man. Like, eventually it comes to a point where they're forced to do that. Government will step in and say, we're going to make homes healthier. And then they'll go on this rampage of new policy and new regulation. And okay, cool. Like, all of the other homes for the last 50 years worked, but we'll do this anyway. And it's just another 100 grand on a 700 grand home just to do it. And it's just wild. And they do that because it's unfair, because house prices have got out of control and we have to do something to slow down the market. And it actually ends up in like that doom loop of inflate, regulate, tax it away, inflate, regulate, tax it away. And I don't know, it's hard to see us getting out of it,
Yeah,
but it causes the issue, right? And this poor person ends up with this shithouse home. Imagine all the other people that bought in that block that didn't get the building report done, because you should trust the council. You should trust the regulator who told us that we're building healthy homes. Instead, you're going to wake up in the middle of winter and there's a fucking waterfall coming down your bedroom wall,
yeah,
and it's
yeah,
like, wow. And it's okay. We've got a 10-year warranty, but the builder's gone.
yeah,
You know, those are immigrants. We let them go.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
wild, man. Like, and it just doesn't get none of that gets any attention, right? And you even see people on social media with big followings, you know, big finance people and stuff like that, and they become, the Fulton Hogan, like I was talking about earlier. They get into the position where it's so strong, they start supporting it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting when it becomes a revolutionary act to just want to build something. Um, it's
I
quite
just
profound.
want my home. Yeah, I put up a post on Twitter the other day. I was like, you get your land, you buy your wood, you put some skills together, and you build a house. And then I was like, nah, it's more like get someone out to have a look, get them to sign off, get approval, then tell you need to change this, and then you start, and then you lay your concrete, and then you come and get them to check, and then you get them to check again, and then you put some frames up, and then you get them to check, and like, fuck, when you look at it like that, it's so far twisted from what it should be, right?
housing is a consumable. I'm a shack maximalist. I think, just build it as long as it doesn't fall down in an earthquake, which is pretty easy to make sure it
But if
doesn't
you're
do
building
that.
your own house and you're building it for you and your family, you're incentivized to build a half decent house, right?
Yeah,
But because we've turned it into this gigantic financial product, like effectively the housing market in New Zealand is the S&P 500 for America, right? Like that's our baby. Real estate agents are stockbrokers and mortgage brokers are the financial advisors and the mutual fund operators. It's effectively the system that we run.
yeah,
And because we've done that and we've turned it into the security so we can get money into the system, it supports it to keep going. And everyone's here to benefit from it, right? Like we just bolt on and I can't change it.
yeah,
It's the way it's going. Maybe
yeah.
one day there'll be a revolution. Lucky I've got a cool savings tool if it all closes down.
Yeah, no, I totally understand and I agree. But look, Mikey, this has been great. It's great. It's great to hear sort of a bit of a reality check from what's happening back on those southern islands because I sort of at a distance I sort of I try not to look too closely. It sort of just makes me a bit sick, to be honest. Like it just I open up. Just as a bit of a morbid curiosity, I open up the mainstream media, and I just think, man, what is actually going on? It's just like squabbling, It's
Yeah,
just
yeah.
pity, and the country yet is still
It's because New
struggling.
Zealand has net zero vision, man. Like no leaders stood up. Every time it's like we're going to fix the economy, and then another one comes in and they're going to help the poor, and like that's not a vision.
Well, I mean, just on that note, I mean, again, I try to be a bit of an optimist here because it's sort of, I think it is a Kiwi thing to be a bit sort of naively optimistic. But I think, this Bitcoin thing, a lot of the tradies, a lot of farmers really kind of get it in my experience. It's kind of real for them.
Mm.
And I wonder if, maybe next election or two, we maybe start seeing some Bitcoiners come into politics in New Zealand and maybe they've been around for a few cycles, they understand it. And who knows, maybe there are some in there who are doing it just on the back end. They just
I
aren't
really
public.
hope so, because even just when I meet someone who has been in Bitcoin for a while and has a decent understanding of it, not like trading it on an exchange, like actually understands it. I've never met one of those people and thought he's a fuckwit. Like every time I have a conversation with one, I'm like, yeah, you get it, man, or her or she, and I'm like, yeah, you got it, and I'm like, just that mindset would be helpful even in the current system. Not even saying like, right, we're going Bukele and we're making it legal tender. Like, not even that. Just the mindset to try and ease the stupidity of what everything that is happening.
Yeah,
So yeah, I'm hopeful that some of those people will as well. And, you know, there'll be some Kiwi patriots at some point that will stand up and go and take the hit.
yeah, yeah. Well, we'll see. We'll watch this space, and I do hope we can, I guess, keep in touch. Hopefully, we do see some signs of it getting better, but unfortunately, maybe it gets worse before it gets better. More than likely, it will get worse. But Mikey, if people want to follow your work, they want to see your famous Twitter rants. Where can they find you, man?
Yeah, so I think Twitter is just Mikey Smith NZ, and that one is probably more my personal views on money and economics.
Yeah,
That one doesn't really have any of the stuff if you want to learn about housing or anything. And then Instagram is the housing one, and I think that one's called Mortgage Performance. And then yeah, you'll see me on every second Keep the Change podcast or so, and talking about that's more about business and being a business operator, or trying to get ahead with by generating more income and stuff like that. So you can actually go and use a savings tool if you can find it.
so you're doing that with Lukey, is that right?
Yep, yep,
Cool.
yep.
Yeah, no, it was really
So
well produced. I thought that episode you had with Darcy on there. So you guys got like a studio and stuff that you use.
yeah, man, it's turned into quite a big thing, which is pretty cool. It just rolled over 1 million downloads the other day.
Oh well, congratulations, man.
Yeah, it's
Well,
crazy, crazy
sounds like
busy.
what you guys are talking about. There's a market for it. So if we've got people like yourself speaking the good word of just common sense, which isn't so common, it's pretty awesome, man. So I appreciate your time, and yeah, man, I hope we can keep in touch.
Thank you for your time, mate. I'm going to be up in Japan next year, so if I don't chat to you between now and then, well, I will, but when I'm come up there, I'll come see you.
Yeah, man. Oh, definitely. I'd love to catch up with you.
Awesome, mate.
Cool. All right. Sweet. Thanks. Thank you for listening. I do hope you enjoyed the show. I am Cody Allingham, and that was The Transformation of Value. If you would like to get in touch, please send me an email at hello@thetransformationofvalue.com, and I will get back to you.